DVB Digital Fast.
Hello and welcome to the DVB Newsroom. I'm Nora. Joining me is James Rodehaver, the Chief of the Myanmar team at the UN Human Rights Office. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
DVB reported that the Myanmar Air Force killed over 20 children during recent airstrikes on a school in Sagaing region. But the regime in Naypyidaw denied the attack, claiming that it did not strike any non-military targets. Would it consider a school a non-military target? And is this a war crime?
Well, schools are normally considered to be a protected object under international humanitarian law. And particularly unless there is firm evidence that a school has been occupied by an armed force and being utilized for military purposes, it should not be considered a legitimate military target. But I think that what you have to understand here on many occasions, the Myanmar military has targeted schools. There have been a countless number of attacks over the last 4 years that have impacted schools, hospitals, religious sites, all of which receive special protection under international humanitarian law and should not be targeted by military forces. Now, the other thing you have to understand as well is the Myanmar Air Force does not use guided or guided weaponry. They use what essentially could be called dumb bombs or munitions that are not guided, and as a result, they're extremely hard to target, especially depending on weather or other conditions that they might encounter during the day. So if they don't have hard intelligence on the ground indicating what is a military target or not, a lot of the weaponry they're using is indiscriminate.
DVB has documented at least 445 people killed and 968 injured in 640 attacks since the March 28 earthquake, with 501 of these attacks occurring since a ceasefire was announced on April 2nd. What is the UN doing about this?
Well, I can only really speak to what my office is doing, and what my office is doing is tracking these attacks very carefully and trying to utilize the data in order to urge parties on the ground to take more measures to protect civilians and also to do public advocacy so people know that these attacks are happening, who is responsible for them, and most importantly, to show that this ceasefire that has been declared is no ceasefire at all. And that makes the job of humanitarians who are urgently trying to get aid to the people that need it after this earthquake, it puts them in a terrible situation of trying to deliver aid in active conflict zones, and not to mention the people affected on the ground, trying to recover from the earthquake, trying to piece their lives back together, but then still never knowing when and where the next attack might come from. And to me, it's even more insidious. I mean, the figures and the data that you put out is of course, incredibly important. And it's indicative of really a couple of different facts that are within those figures. One is that over about 90% of all of these attacks are being, through airstrikes or aerial weaponry. So that includes drones and paramotors, and then also artillery barrages. And the way the Myanmar military uses these types of attacks is not targeted in most cases. So these are indiscriminate attacks, 90% of all of those attacks being essentially indiscriminate. It's no wonder so many civilians are dying in these attacks. And one has to wonder, is that the aim in the end, to continue this constant campaign of striking fear into the civilian population? The other thing that, of course, is underlying all these figures is that 40% of all of those attacks that you are talking about are occurring in areas that were impacted by the earthquake. And that to me is absolutely unconscionable because in a time of emergency, particularly during a ceasefire called specifically to ensure that there is a humanitarian response for the people that were impacted by the earthquake, that means that assistance can't get to those people or can't help them. It also betrays what are the priorities? Are the priorities actually to help people in need? Or is it to try and further military aims by striking fear into the civilian populace? And so those figures are really damning, I think, of how these attacks are being carried out, particularly at this time.
UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk has called on the Myanmar military to cease all attacks on civilians, begin a nationwide halt to all fighting, and restore the country to civilian rule. Is there any way the UN can mandate this? What about at the Security Council?
Well, of course, whenever you talk about how to mandate this, you are talking about, in the end, the need for a Security Council resolution or some sort of political process to negotiate an end to this crisis. There you're going to need the support of course, the permanent 5 members of the Security Council for a resolution that would mandate the end of the fighting. Or you're going to need the countries that have influence particularly with the Myanmar military, to really put their feet down and say, enough is enough. You agreed in April 2021 with ASEAN to tone down the violence and to end the crisis. You have not done so. You have not met. They have only. Most of the ASEAN consent. 5-point consensus is completely unfulfilled, and more pressure needs to be put on the military for this. Not just because of the pain and suffering of the civilian population in Myanmar, which of course is enormous. It's unbelievably huge, the impact of this crisis on the people, but then also the impacts it's having on the region, the economic impacts, of course, the strain of having so many people crossing Myanmar's borders, all of its borders. There's a lot that has happened as a result of that, whether it's the proliferation of organized crime, the influx of weaponry, of drugs. There is a lot of illicit activity resulting from this, all of which destabilizes the region. And in the end, it's up to the Myanmar military to live up to its commitments and its obligations under international law and to stop this violence. So that's not, one would think that that's a pretty clear mandate to place on the military's head. What's needed now are for the member states that make up the United Nations to demand this.
We have reported that the Brotherhood alliance of 3 ethnic armed groups have extended its ceasefire up to May 31st. The regime did so after the first 5 days of the month elapsed without any extension. But the National Unity Government has not. Its spokesperson told DVB that no ceasefire would work unless there's an international monitoring mechanism. What do you think?
Well, I think that, these declarations of ceasefires are all well and good, but, and of course, they're badly needed. But in this case, these are not genuine ceasefires, particularly given that the Myanmar military has really, since the hour after the earthquake struck, has not ceased attacking. And in every one of these declarations of a ceasefire, every single armed group, of course, has that caveat that we will stop fighting, but we have to defend ourselves if we are attacked. And since the attacks have not stopped, of course, everyone can then claim that they're defending themselves. So I do think that there is a certain logic behind this idea that any ceasefire has to be agreed by all parties. There has to be accountability in the declaration of that ceasefire, where not only the parties hold each other accountable, but of course the states with influence with all of these parties hold them to account. And that means monitoring. It means certain criteria or benchmarks that have to be met that show that violence is actually decreasing. that they are stopping, the use of certain types of weaponry, that they are either, not moving troops around to different areas, or they're moving them away from lines of conflict. But most importantly, I think it means stopping airstrikes, stopping the use of air power. And without serious benchmarks, without serious monitoring, and without serious pressure from states of influence, that simply does not look like it will happen.
Is the UN in a position to support or organize such a monitoring mechanism in Myanmar right now?
Right now, I would say it would be incredibly difficult because the UN presence in the country is very much dedicated to trying to provide a humanitarian response and a response at a local level in local communities to ensure they have some measure of resiliency and a capacity to take care of themselves. The type of monitoring that would be needed would, I think, definitely require an influx of UN personnel from outside, or some other form of monitoring mechanism supported by member states.
Chinese state media reported the regime leader Min Aung met with Chinese President Xi Jinping for the first time since the 2021 military coup. Does this mean China would veto any resolution on Myanmar taken at the Security Council?
That's speculation. I think that so far, at least, that the limited actions that have been taken in the Security Council have been taken by consensus within the 15 members of the council. I wouldn't want to speculate on when the veto would be used or by whom.
Min Aung said his regime is sticking to its election plan to hold polls starting in December. Some members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations seem to be supporting it. What do you see happening?
Well, that's again, that's prognostication. That's not in my mandate to be a fortune teller. But I would just say that I really do. I really appreciated the statement that was put out by the ASEAN chair earlier this year after the initial meetings with the new chairmanship at the beginning of this year. And I think a very clear statement that this is not a time for elections. This is a time for de-escalation and peace. I would think that if you want to have a serious effort at having free and fair elections that really reflect the will of the Myanmar people, the most urgent things you need are protection and peace. And that does not exist on the ground right now. So I would think that those would be the most urgently needed criteria.
Mm-hmm. Min Aung and NUG Prime Minister Man Win Khai then held meetings with the current ASEAN chair, Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. Is this a positive step for the civilian alternative to the regime in Naypyidaw?
Well, I would just say that to me, if you look at what ASEAN has been consistently calling for 4 years, it has been an inclusive political process, engagement with all parties. And so I would hope that any engagements made with the military end up being engagements with all parties to this crisis. And I think most importantly, engagements that involve the people of Myanmar, whether that be through representatives of civil society or engagements with members of the democracy movement, or with leadership from local communities. But I think that more engagement is needed that is really reflective of the voices and the aspirations of the Myanmar people.
Min Aung attended the BIMSTEC Regional Summit in April and met with the elected leaders of Thailand and India, as well as the chief advisor of Bangladesh. Does this mean Bangkok, Delhi, and Dhaka recognize his regime?
I don't know, to be honest. I think that all parties right now are searching for any way to change the dynamics inside of Myanmar. I think that whether they are friends of the military or whether they are people that have been more supportive of the people and of the democracy movement or of the national unity government, I think that everyone is frustrated by the deadlock that the country seems to be in, which is no real political process, but a worsening violence on the ground with a complete absence of civilian protection. And that, of course, has real consequences. Of course, it means that humanitarian need is constantly rising. So you have a humanitarian crisis that is really, at this point, almost spiraling out of control. You have an economy in free fall because of really the mismanagement of the economy as it existed, but also because of the impact of violence. And then, of course, you have the deepening, political intransigency of the military and some of the armed groups. And that just ends up being a cocktail where the people just get more desperate and are constantly being forgotten in this calculus of how do you change these dynamics towards an eventual settlement, towards a solution that will actually improve the situation that the people find themselves in and diminish their suffering. So to me, that is what I hope member states and the neighbors of Myanmar are calculating, because I think that they also realize that as the Myanmar people suffer, it has a worse and worse impact on their own countries. And I think it's in everyone's best interest in the region to try to find some way to move this crisis out of continually getting worse and maybe trying to find some ways to improve it. So, I don't have the deepest insights into the thinking of some of the leaders that have met with the military. But I do hope that their message has been consistent, that it's time to stop the violence. It's time to stop, blocking efforts at real de-escalation and start moving towards a peaceful resolution to help the people of Myanmar.
This flurry of diplomacy since the earthquake has proven that more countries in the region and internationally seem to be recognizing Min Aunghlai's regime. Why is this?
Again, if that is a correct reading of the situation, I think, again, it is the desperation that people feel with the lack of progress of reaching a settlement in the country. I think that people see this increased suffering of the people and the impacts that has in all of these different avenues. The worsening protection crisis, the worsening violence, the worsening economic situation, the spill out of people out of Myanmar's borders, and they just want the situation to change. And so I just think that situation reflects growing desperation. And again, my hope is that as people understand that look, if anything's going to change, we need to engage more with the parties. They realize that means all parties, because meeting with one party will not resolve this crisis. Because especially the military sees only one solution to this conflict, and that is to kill its way out of the crisis. That's not going to happen. That's not going to work. There has to be some sort of political resolution, and it has to be grounded in protection and human rights.
How can international actors balance engagement for aid delivery with accountability for rights abuses?
Well, I think that in the end, it's again looking at this dual notion that whenever you seek access to deliver humanitarian assistance, you have to demand protection, and that means not only protection of the people receiving assistance, but protection of the humanitarians delivering it, and a general de-escalation. in order to make sure that the aid gets to the people that need it most. And that becomes extremely difficult whenever you have, of course, the whole system of limitations on humanitarian assistance that have been put in place over the last 4 years. Everything from the banking restrictions to the limitations on customs, of course, the rather draconian registration system for NGOs and civil society groups, humanitarians, and then, of course, the very restricted travel authorizations and freedom of movement. And then if you couple that with the clampdown on communication, secure communication, it makes it extremely difficult to even get basic information out about humanitarian needs in the areas that need the assistance the most. So these are all issues that need to be addressed, and they all, of course, involve core human rights principles and the need for greater protection. You have to, if you don't have, freedom to access information, you're going to be putting yourself at greater risk. If you don't have freedom of movement, it's going to be very difficult for people to get to areas that are safe or for humanitarians to reach them. If you're not able to provide even the most basic, humanitarian services, wash or food assistance or clean water, then you're going to be failing to meet those basic human rights to food, healthy environment, to medicine and healthcare. So it's all interlinked. And that to me is the core thing. You can't have good humanitarian assistance or access without also having human rights protection and protection of civilians.
The International Court of Justice and a federal court in Argentina are persecuting Myanmar for crimes against the Rohingya. If the International Criminal Court issues an arrest warrant for Min Aung Hlaing, will this bring any justice? What else can be done?
Well, it can only bring justice if member states act on those warrants for arrest. To me, it's very frustrating to see Min Aung Hlaing traveling quite freely right now, whenever there are active warrants out for his arrest that frankly should have been acted upon by different states where he traveled. And it's rather, critical that eventually comes to pass. We of course saw, some very key figures from this region that were named in arrest warrants, and I believe former President Duterte in the Philippines was actually finally arrested himself. So it can happen, but for it to happen, it will, of course, again, it requires member states to take this seriously and to really act on the need for accountability in order to make sure it takes place. But there are many other things that can be done. And of course, in this very troubled time, not just in Myanmar, but in the world, when it comes to funding for humanitarian assistance, funding for civil society, it's incredibly important to remember that the efforts of groups to document these crimes and violations that happen on the ground on a daily basis, they desperately need support. They are doing incredibly difficult work and incredibly challenging security threats to their personnel. And they need the money to continue those efforts and of course the ability to continue to provide the training and the guidance that those personnel operating in very dangerous conditions need. It also points to the other side of this, which is that there are a growing number of victims in Myanmar that have been subjected to violence or witnessed violence, and they urgently need support as well. And a key part of accountability is ensuring that victims not only have a sense of justice, but an actual network of support. They need to be able to recover from these experiences if they're ever going to live to see justice or a future where they can take an active part in the future of their country. So that aspects of justice and of accountability, I think, also cannot be ignored.
So before we conclude, is there anything you would like to share with the people of Myanmar?
Well, I think the primary thing I would like to share with the people of Myanmar is that, we are with you. The UN Human Rights has, for the last 4.5 years, we have worked in tandem with Myanmar civil society. We have worked or with local communities throughout the country to get information on the violations that normal people have suffered on a daily basis. And we are doing our utmost to make sure that their voices are heard loud and clear, because we have an obligation to the victims to make sure that their voices are heard and that they do one day get to see accountability.
Thank you for joining me today, James.
Thank you.